This podcast will be introducing blood CT. And so there's a chart. It's actually in your lab book on page 427 or right around that page, depending upon your lab version of the book. And so basically I'm going to go over the highlights of what blood is made out of. And then we have specific podcasts going over the specific cells and their functions. All right, so basically, before I start this chart on page 427, talking about what blood is made out of, there are 5 extra terms, and these are all listed on your official picture sheet. And so basically, we're going to start out with whole blood. And so basically, when somebody says, oh, I'm giving blood, then basically they're saying they're giving all their cells, their hematocytes, and plasma, okay? And so hematocyte is the general term for all blood cells, and we have 3 specific types of blood cells. So we have erythrocytes, commonly known as RBCs. We have leukocytes, known as white blood cells, and thrombocytes, commonly known as platelets, okay? So many of you will write RBC, red blood cell, RBC, but you cannot write that on a test because that's not its official name, and that does not go into medical records. You have to write the big term, erythrocyte. Same for leukocytes. Leukocytes, commonly called white blood cells, WBCs. So always write out the big anatomical term when you're writing into medical records. All right, so basically when I say I'm giving blood, I'm giving hematocytes plus plasma. Nothing is missing, okay? So if they say, oh, I'm just donating plasma, then that means all you're giving is the liquid part of the blood. Not any cells are going with the liquid part of the blood, just the plasma, okay? And nothing is removed from it except for the cells, right? So basically plasma just refers to liquid part of the blood. Then serum, okay? Serum is made from donating plasma. And so serum is plasma minus fibrinogen. And fibrinogen is the clotting protein. And so basically this equals the clotting protein. And so if you want to donate blood, basically you'll donate plasma and then they treat it and make it serum. And so the serum, in the serum, they add a chemical that will destroy this specific protein. And then you can use serum in transfusions for operations, for any emergency situation. And so serum can be used for many different things. All right, then we have the term tissue fluid. Tissue fluid is plasma minus all proteins. No proteins at all. And so why don't you want any proteins? Because tissue fluid is used in organ transplants. Basically because then your chances of rejection of the organ is much less because you're not adding more new proteins into the person's body. So then you'll make less antibodies for the rejection purposes. So anyway, that's tissue fluid. And then lymph is just leaked plasma from your fenestrated capillaries, cardiovascular capillaries. All the plasma that leaks out that's going into the intracellular spaces, basically, that is called lymph, leaked plasma. And so what collects lymph? Lymphatic capillaries. Lymph capillaries pick up leaked plasma. And so the leaked plasma is called lymph. So those are 5 extra terms that we use that are associated with blood CT. All right, now over here, how much blood does a person have? Well, basically, guys have 5 to 7 liters. Girls, we have 4 to 6 liters total blood capacity. And then when you're preggo, you can add an extra liter. So girls can have up to 7 liters, right? So they'll add extra blood when they're pregnant because of the fetus. Right now, what is blood made out of? It's called formed elements. This is on the table right here. Formed elements make up 45%. So formed elements is another term for hematocytes, the blood cells, okay? And then what else is the blood made out of? 55% plasma. All right, so basically 55% plasma, that's nice. And so 45 and 55 equals 100%. And so that's what your blood is made out of, these two things. So if we look at the blood cells in general, we have erythrocytes, red blood cells, and it's on the sheet right here, 4 to 6 million, okay? 4 to 6 million circulating at any time. And what do the erythrocytes do in general? They carry the gases, oxygen and CO2. So they're just for respiratory function. All right, leukocytes, white blood cells. Oh, we have anywhere from 5 to 10,000. I sort of rounded some of these off to make them easier to remember. Leukocytes in general, we don't have a lot of white blood cells. And so what do? Defense and immunity. And so when you say immunity, that means it makes antibodies. Defense means they're phagocytic on anything that's invading the body, foreign antigens that shouldn't be there. So they try to destroy foreign material that enters the body. And then thrombocytes, we have about 500,000 of them, 500,000. And these little bitty cells are for blood clotting. And the real term for blood clotting is hemostasis. Common term is coagulation, right? So we'll be having a separate podcast on that by itself. So now, what is in your plasma? What's in your plasma? You always have to have more plasma than you do cells. So this is why the difference, the 10% difference between 45% cells and 55% plasma. Why? You have to float your cells. If you don't have enough water to float your cells, you're going to form clots, and that will be like dams inside the lumens of your blood vessels, and that will back the blood up. Blood will make the wall of the artery and veins explode, and so basically, you'll be dead. So you always have to have more plasma than cells. And so basically, we do have a test for seeing, a real quick test. It's called a hematocrit test to see if you do have the proper percentages of blood versus plasma. And so the hematocrit test, and I actually do this to you in lab if you're one of my volunteers, basically we have these little capillary tubes. They're called microcapillary tubes. And all it takes is one small drop of blood. It gets sucked up into the capillary. And then we put some clay on it. And then I'm going to put it in a centrifuge right here and spin it down for about 5 minutes in the centrifuge. And then the capillary tube will come out looking totally different. And so it separates into layers. And so on the top, you'll see a yellow liquid, and that's the plasma, okay? And then you'll see a little white area sitting on top of the red blood cells. And the white area is called the buffy coat. The buffy coat, these are all your white blood cells, all 5. And then the red part that you have the most of will be red blood cells and your thrombocytes, the platelets, right? And so that will be the red area. And so basically, then we just measure with a special ruler, or you can just do it with a millimeter regular ruler. You can measure the amount of cells versus the amount of plasma. And so you should come up with 55% plasma and 45% cells down below, right? And so that's a quick indicator for do you have the correct percentages of plasma versus cells. So basically, if a person comes up with a low percent of plasma, they're dehydrated, okay? They're dehydrated. If they have a big white area of white blood cells, they've got an infection somewhere, okay? And then red blood cells, if they're low, you've got bone marrow issues, and you're probably anemic. And so low iron, also the hemoglobin. So it could be any of those things, and they would want to investigate. So they always are worried about, do you have enough plasma versus cells, okay? So now let's look at what is actually in plasma. And so plasma is a total of 55% of the blood, but if I break down that 55%, the majority of plasma is made out of water, right? 90% is water. And I do have these percents on here. Why do you have to have so much water in your plasma? Number one thing is to float your cells, to float the cells, okay? And then it also carries dissolved substances. And so everybody's heard probably that water is the universal solvent. Most things can dissolve in it, and that is absolutely true. So they carry gases, foods, waste products. And when you have this much water, it will also absorb a lot of heat and make you cooler. So if you don't have a lot of water and you're playing sports, sweating a lot, then water content may go down if you don't replace that, and then you're gonna feel way hotter than if you had normal levels, right? And then what else is in your plasma? Salts. And so salts are generally known as electrolytes. And so you have about 5% in salts. And what are the major salts that you have? Calcium, sodium, potassium, chloride, magnesium, and bicarbonates, right? Those are the major salts. There are definitely more salts, but these are the major ones. And so if you remember from 141, some of these combine to do what? They do muscle contraction, and they also are responsible for nerve impulse production and conduction. So basically, in bicarbs, you have to have bicarbs to balance the pH of your blood, because otherwise, if it becomes too acidic, your blood vessels burst, and then that will kill you. Obviously, those are aneurysms. So basically, bicarbs very important to maintain pH, and then the salts are important in general, not only to run muscles and nerves, but also to maintain osmotic pressure and in the cells and outside the cells, so for osmoregulation. So osmo always refers to water balance. Water balance. Is it going to help water go in to the cells, or is it going to suck it out and dehydrate it? So anyway, that's why you have to have salts to maintain osmotic balance, pH buffering, and then basically membrane permeability, and then the nerves and muscle contractions, right? Nerve impulse and muscle contractions. So those are about 5% of this 55%, right? And then proteins, 2.5%. And so there are three major groups of protein that float loose. These pieces of protein float loose in your plasma, right? And so the number one is albumin. Albumin. And so albumin on your list, and they're all listed here, albumin is very important for pH buffering and also to maintain water balance between the cells inside and out. And so albumin, very important. Fibrinogen is the second one. Fibrinogen protein, it floats in the plasma, and basically it's for clotting of the blood, okay? That's all it does, is it makes clots. And so we have a whole podcast on blood clotting. And then we have something called globulins. That's the third big category of proteins that are always found in your plasma, and that's where they're carried. They're not made there, but they're carried in the plasma. And so globulins are also known as antibodies, and that's a form of defense. So these, when you think about antibodies, think of them as pieces of protein that basically are like double sticky tape or like Velcro, right? So they're gonna attach to foreign material called antigens and try to destroy them. All right, so now that would be 2.5% your proteins. And then we have another 2.5% basically to make 100% of this 55%. And so now miscellaneous substances would be like food items, dissolved food items, waste products, anything like ammonia, urea, uric acid, nitrogenous waste. And then gases can be carried in your plasma, oxygen and CO2, and other gases, bad gases, but you can have gases. And then, of course, your hormones. Your hormones will be in the plasma of the blood because that's where all hormones go. They are made in cells and then released into capillaries, cardiovascular capillaries, right? Or lymphatic capillaries. So anyway, so those are the miscellaneous substances. So that's a little introduction to blood CT, and then we have specific podcasts on all the blood cells.